We are putting the GS deal for WA in the spotlight. The federal government faces huge cost blowouts in its upcoming budget. Earlier this hour, I spoke with Saul Eslake, one of the two economists, and there's more, who reviewed the agreement and came to the same conclusion that, as it currently stands, this is going to cost the federal budget $50 billion over a decade. Joining me now is independent MP Allegra Spender. Allegra, you always are looking at more efficient ways to tax people, tax voters in particular. This, as it's been laid out by Saul Eslake, Chris Richardson and others, looks like, to quote Saul Eslake, a pretty grubby deal.
Look, I don't think that the way that GST currently works is actually that effective, and I think there are two big problems with it. The point that's been raised by Saul and others, that if the purpose is to make sure that you get the services to the money to the states who can't otherwise pay for them, why is WA getting all this extra money, given that how much it has capacity to pay right now with such a high iron ore price? But I think the second big problem really with this is that what we've done in our current GST model is we send money to those states who we say have greater need and less capacity to pay. But the problem is we're not getting the outcomes either. So if I was in Parliament this week with the Closing the Gap statement was released, you're seeing that the outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are not improving, but we are sending a lot of that GST money to the states, who are meant to be doing that work. And frankly, they're not being very effective in doing the work on health and education. So I don't think it's working in either ways, to be honest. Yeah,
they're not getting bang for their buck, and essentially all of us lose because this money is being wasted. But when it comes to WA in particular, I mean, this deal done by Turnbull, Morrison was the treasurer at the time. It's clear that this was all about shoring up those Liberal seats in WA. Remember, at the time there were 6 Liberal cabinet ministers in the Turnbull cabinet, and obviously that has a lot of sway. But now Labor's in the same boat because they want to retain all the seats that they won at the last election. So this is, bipartisan pork barrelling in a way.
Look, I think you're right. The politics means that WA is absolutely in play, which means that people don't want to rock the boat. So I think that is it. But this is the right debate to be having, to say, look, is this GST system, is it working in any of the ways that we would like it to? Yeah. And one of the issues I have with the system, for example, is that, if, for instance, in New South Wales, we have a lot of pokies in New South Wales, and it gives a lot of money to the state governments. Personally, I'd love us to see much less reliant on pokey money in New South Wales. But if the government in New South Wales said, we're going to take back, we're not going to have as many pokies, we're not going to raise as much money from pokies, there'd be no benefit to New South Wales. There would be no more GST money coming in. So reforms that actually the federal government and lots of us would like to see made, there are no incentives in the current structure of GST.
Well, there's no incentives, and the whole system seems pretty unfair at the moment. I'm going back to what Dominic Perrottet said last week at a property council lunch I was at. He said essentially as well about when it comes to immigration, everyone needs and supports immigration to a point, but when it comes down to the lion's share, well, New South Wales does a lot of the heavy lifting in accommodating new migrants. Yes, they're getting the benefit of jobs, but they're not compensated for that, and there's pressure on housing, transport, etc. And then side by side with this GST deal for WA, it looks like it stinks. Like, should the premiers be writing? I don't know.
I think the Premier should be speaking up and saying, we want a deal that is simple, that is clear, but is also make sure that we make the difference to the people who are the most vulnerable. Because I think the principle of the GST deal is effectively that we want everyone in Australia to be able to access the same sort of public services. We have that as a strong value in Australia, but we're not, frankly, achieving that right now. So the GST deal, as it works right now, and the incentive structures as it works right now, doesn't mean that we're getting that same sort of quality of services across the country. And I think that's a real problem for me.
Would you agree that it's the worst public policy decision of the 21st century?
I think there are some very strong contenders for that one. So, repealing, I would argue things like repealing the carbon price and all those sorts of things. They would be certainly on the list. So that's a highly contested area. But certainly, I feel that neither previous governments nor it doesn't seem so far this government is willing to really look in the face of the GST model and say, look, how can we do this better to get better outcomes? But to make sure it still stays fair.
Well, circumstances have changed. That was the argument when it came to stage 3 tax cuts. So we'll see what Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese have to say about this one. It's fascinating because of the politics that are interlinked in all of it. Allegra, thanks so much for your time. We'll speak soon.
Thanks, Laura.